All right. Today on Why Is Everyone Yelling, we have Lindsay Garrett, who is a licensed clinical social worker on the show. Welcome to the show, Lindsay.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having
Okay, well, today we have so many great topics to cover, but first, can you just share with us how you decided you wanted to become a social worker and what you focus on with your job?
me. Yes. I decided that I wanted to become a social worker when I was a senior in high school, I guess. I've always been interested in psychology, and I was heading into college thinking that I would major in psychology. And I ended up talking with a therapist during that year of high school. And she was asking me what I wanted to do. And I told her that basically I want to do what you want to do, what you do. And she said, well, I'm a social worker. Like, I don't have a psychology degree. And she explained that psychology was a little more research based, kind of behind the scenes, doing studies, and that social work was more hands on and actually working with people and interacting. And I thought, that sounds good. I think I'll do that. And so I got my bachelor's in social work, and then I went on to get my master's because it just provided more opportunities. And I was so glad when I hit my master's program. I was so glad that I ended up majoring in social work, because like 80% of the people in my master's program were people with a bachelor's in psychology who couldn't find a job.
Yeah.
uh, so that's kind of what led me there. And then I did my master's level internship at an adoption agency called the Gladney Center for Adoption, and I have been working there ever since I graduated. I've shifted roles every couple of years, but have been working in adoption for about 10 years now.
Okay, so yeah, you work with parents who are preparing to become mom and dad or parents.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Through adoption. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like.
It is different depending on what type of adoption you're doing, but in general, it's a ton of paperwork. I forgot to ask, can I curse on your
Yeah, you
podcast?
can.
Okay. It's a shit ton of paperwork. And then there's always training involved to some extent. So most of the families I work with are typically adopting older kids, either internationally or from foster care. So they have to go through hours and hours of training on all sorts of different topics, but we focus a lot on trauma and how trauma affects kiddos, attachment, how children attach, the mental health things that they may come with, and the types of parenting that work with children who've been through trauma. Often what we would call traditional parenting, that is a lot of like consequence behavior, like fear-based parenting, just doesn't work very well with those kids. It can be really triggering for them. And so if that's the type of parenting that a lot of us grew up with, or we have parents who are already parenting and that works with their biological kids, and then they hit this new child and it doesn't work, we talk about new ways of doing that.
I find that fascinating because if that does not work for kids who have had significant trauma in their life, I wonder what changes we could make also for kids who haven't had significant trauma
Mm-hmm.
in their life, to maybe do it better. And I've talked about that quite a bit on this podcast, like how we were parented affects our parenting. And I think that we've all heard this line from parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles, like, well, we did it that way and it worked out just fine.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
our generation, like us as parents, I think have been working to find a new way to do this. You mentioned fear based, and sometimes it's really hard not to pull the whole line to your kids of, if you don't do this, you're going to get this, or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. And I'm really been trying to reshape my way of those kinds of things, how I communicate making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and all that. So I'm curious, in your line of work, you're a parent yourself. You have 2 kids, biological kids.
Yeah.
Do you apply those techniques and strategies that you teach to adoptive parents who might be bringing in children into the home who have suffered trauma? Do you apply some of that to your own parenting, even though your kids haven't been through trauma?
Yes, I apply. That's how I parent. And it's very interesting that you talk about the generational shift, because I've been teaching this to parents who are preparing for a child with trauma for 10 years. And 10 years ago, this was different and new and not very well known. But now I feel like it's seeped into the mainstream, what we would call connected parenting, or like relationship-based parenting, or there's a ton of respectful parenting. There's a ton of names for it.
Positive parenting.
Is just kind of how our generation is shifting, I think, as millennial parents. And some of that, I think, is just wanting to do things differently. Some of that, I think, is because we feel a lot of pressure as parents to do things really well. And some of that is the research. We have learned new things about how the brain develops, about how our relationship with our kids affects them, about how the effects of like fear-based parenting, corporal punishment, about how the brain interprets that. And, the Maya Angelou quote of when you know better, you do better, like we're knowing more. And so our strategies are shifting because of that. So I would say I wouldn't say all, because, you use what works in the day.
Right.
But I use most of the methods that we talk about with our parents, with my own kids. And that's actually been something that's been really cool as I became a parent. It made it so much easier to relate to the clients I work with, the struggles and the fears and the strategies that I use with my kids, saying like, I do this and it works versus, the research says to do this.
What are some of those methods? I don't know if there's an easy way to break them down or what.
Oh man, I could talk about this all day. I would say some of the biggest things that we do at my house that I also teach parents is focusing on emotions and the value of emotions, of naming what's going on for your kids, of teaching them about the different emotions, because often when our kids are having what traditional parenting would call tantrum, what I would call a meltdown, or even being dysregulated, their bodies, out of sync, and they're overwhelmed, it's usually paired with a big emotion. And especially if we're talking about small children, I have a 3-year-old, so that is the year of big emotion. Their brains and their bodies haven't learned how to process those things yet. So we have to kind of come alongside them and teach them how, and name these things, because when they're just experiencing it and they don't know what's going on, it can be really scary. And so focusing on emotions, naming emotions, validating the emotion, even if the behavior is not acceptable, the emotion always is. So doing a lot of teaching and naming in that. And then I would say another thing that we do a lot in my house is finding ways to share control with our kids. They, thinking about the life of a child, they get told what to wear, they get told what to eat, they get told all day long at school, they have to follow directions, they get told what time to do things. They have so little control over their lives. And I know as an adult, control is the best thing in the world. I love it so much. And so why would that be different for our kids? So finding little ways of sharing control with them of, do you want this or this for a snack? Do you want the pink cup or the blue cup? What do you want to wear today? Like maybe I buy all your clothes, but on a daily basis, you get to pick which ones you want to wear. Do you want to brush your teeth or put on your pajamas first. Finding those little ways of sharing control, of giving them some ownership over their lives, makes it easier when you do have to say, no, this is what we're doing, because they've gotten a little bit of that power. And that can be a really tricky thing for a lot of parents, because we're taught that, like, I know at least my life growing up was like, you do what I say because I told you to, because I'm in charge.
Yep.
So taking the time to explain the why behind things, or even to like negotiate and compromise with your child, can feel really wrong at first. But underneath it all, one of the things that I like to think about, and I tell parents, is imagine if your child was an adult. Like, imagine if they were your spouse or your best friend or whatever, and you were trying to figure something out together. Like, if we were talking to an adult, we would never say, well, just do this because I'm in charge and don't ask questions.
Yeah.
That would be silly, and that adult would not accept that. So why do we expect our children to do that? So that I say would be two big overarching things of like focusing on emotions and naming emotions and managing emotions, and then finding ways to share power and control.
I love that. Yeah. And I mean, I have noticed when I apply both of those things to whatever the situation is with my kids, it ultimately ends up better than had I not applied those things. I'm going to give an example. You're going to find on this podcast that I give lots of examples.
I'm sure you have many.
We're doing this every day. This morning, my 4-year-old got up throwing a fit that he wanted this persimmon pie that we had last night. He wanted it for breakfast. And so I somehow remained super calm all morning, even though it's been a crazy morning.
Well done.
Yes, I'm applauding myself. I even told my husband, we were just sitting we're in Indiana for a funeral. So like we traveled from North Carolina to Indiana. So we're like, everybody's thrown off, right? If we feel thrown off, our kids certainly feel thrown off. But anyway, my husband and I were sitting at the dining room table kind of working together, both doing our own thing, and our kids were kind of all over the house. And he's like, I feel like everybody's all out of sorts. And I thought he meant me at first. And I was like, wait a minute. I've been so calm all morning. What are you talking about? But then he meant the kids. And we were like, well, look what we've been through the last few days. Anyway, back to the meltdown about the persimmon pie. And I named it. I was like, I feel like sugary foods taste really good, and I understand that you want that. Like, I would actually really like to eat persimmon pie right now too. But that's not a good way to start the day. That your body won't provide the right kind of energy that your body needs. And anyway, he went on to make these really annoying animal noises, and I kind of walked away, and we moved on and finally had Cheerios. But I think had I just yelled at him or been like, shut up about the persimmon pie, he wouldn't have been validated in feeling that way. Well, if you have persimmon pie for dinner and you're 4, you might wake up thinking about the persimmon pie. So yeah, I think that as I've talked to professionals and been working on this in my own life, I'm seeing the positive results, but it takes effort, man. It's hard.
It does, but I have found that you can either do it on the front end or the back end. So in that situation, you paused and you validated. He was expressing a need. I feel like I need this.
Yeah.
It's so good. I want it. And you validated that need on the front end. If you'd have just shut him down or said, no, we're not doing that, you can have this, you probably would have gotten a meltdown, and you would have spent time dealing with it on the back end. So it's kind of just a toss up. Do I want to try and be more proactive on the front end and do these things in the moment, or do I want to shut it down, move on, and then I'm more likely to get a meltdown, and then I have to deal with that?
Totally.
What I want to spend time doing.
And that little story, yes, I'm patting myself on the back. For the listeners, like, that's just one example. Like, don't think I'm always that calm, cool, and collected, because I'm not. But man, I was proud of myself. And then when you act like that and when you respond like that, you should be proud of yourself too.
Absolutely. Especially in the morning. If I've had at least one cup of coffee, I am not a functioning person
Don't
who
ask
is
me
able
for
to
anything.
talk to anyone.
Yeah, don't ask me for anything before I've had my coffee. Don't even ask me for your breakfast yet. Like, I need at least 20 minutes. Okay, this is great. So let's shift from, I love those two methods that we talked about. Validating the emotion, sharing control. That's awesome. Let's move on to defining what your family mission statement is and how those values can like filter through the rest of your life.
Yes, this is something that I actually learned in a training. I do so many trainings, partly because I'm just a research nerd, but partly because I don't like to recommend things to parents unless I've actually been through it. So I did a training a few years ago with a therapist and adoptive parent named Marshall Lyles. He's a very well-known play therapist in the Austin area in Texas. And one of the things that he introduced in training was having a family mission statement. And the concept of that is similar to an organizational mission statement of basically reflecting on what your goal is for your family and your parenting, and then having this overarching statement as a guide. And then underneath that, if you want to get even more specific, choosing what your values are for your family. And I think this is an exercise that anyone could do at any point in their parenting life, but especially I think it's helpful for new parents because you're trying to decide, what type of family do we want to be? So your family mission statement could be very general. I came up with something that was something like to be a guide for my child as she discovers, what she loves, who she is, and teach her to like grow into a responsible, kind adult, something very general. And then underneath that, choosing values that go along with meeting that big overarching goal. Some of ours are, naming and validating emotions, or giving my child space and following her lead in play. So we have a lot of open-ended toys in our house, and we give her, we try not to steer her towards things. We kind of just let her explore, and then if she's into something, we'll follow her lead in that. And having a lot of downtime, like letting her be bored. We try not to overschedule, which is difficult, less difficult in 2020. But,
yeah, totally.
So those kind of broken down day-to-day decisions go back into our family mission statement. And the goal of the family mission statement is really just to give you some direction. So often I think we're caught up in the day-to-day because we have to be, our kids are always there. They always have needs. It's complicated, especially when you have more than one. But taking a step back and looking at that big picture, like with my parenting, what am I wanting to accomplish? What am I wanting for my children? And then defining that with your partner, if you have a partner, being on the same page, and then breaking that big theme down into, okay, on a day-to-day basis, what does that look like? So responsibility is something that we really value. It is in our family mission statement. So that looks like my 3-year-old has chores. She picks up her toys. She helps unload the dishwasher. And we will build on that as she gets older. We talk to her about being responsible. We talk to her about being kind to other people. Like those are things that we talk about very often in our family. It also, I think, really helps not only choose what is important and what you want to focus on, but what is not as important and what you can let go of. So your example about the persimmon pie kind of reminded me of this. One of the things that is not something that we really harp on in my house is food. I mean, I want my children to eat, and I want them to not eat crap all the time, but I'm not spending a lot of time, dictating what they need to eat or worrying about making sure every single thing is healthy or shopping for all organic things. In some families, that might be really important to you. But for our family, it's not. So that's something, I mean, I still want them to eat. And if they get one vegetable a day, I feel good about myself. Yeah. But I'm not standing over my child, hovering or even checking to see what she's eating. And that's something that I can just kind of be a little more flexible on, because I know it's not one of my main things that are really, really important to me as a parent, if that makes sense. Like your example, I probably would have been like, you can have a small piece with your Cheerios.
Okay. I like that too.
Like, also, especially when you're traveling, it's like traveling rule, like wheels off, whatever gets us through the day, man.
Isn't that so? Yeah. I mean, and I could see myself in a different situation doing that as well, and that wouldn't have been wrong, which is the other thing, you know, one of the other things we want to hit on today is like, just because it's right for you doesn't mean it's right for someone else, and vice versa.
Absolutely. There's so much comparison with our parenting generation. And that's where I think a mission statement can really help, because you can filter out. We see on social media, like somebody does this. We see, our friend does this. And we would experience the same situation. We might handle it two different ways. And if it works for us and for our kid, then it's fine.
Yeah.
And it might be completely different. So your mission statement can really help you filter out those things, because I think so often we hear somebody else doing something differently, or we see things on social media, or somebody's trying to sell us something and we think, oh God, maybe I need to do it this way. We are kind of wired, and our generation takes parenting, I think, so personally and makes it such a part of our identity that we automatically think if someone is doing it differently, that means that we're doing it wrong. But it doesn't. If it works for you and your family, then it's not wrong.
Totally.
As long as nobody's getting hurt.
I love go ahead.
I think the mission statement and your values can kind of be your guiding light of when you start questioning, because we all do it. Start questioning, should I be doing it this way, or that person does it that way, or comparing yourself. This can be your guidepost to go back to. I'm like, no, I'm aligned with what my values are. This is meeting the overarching theme that I want and my goals for my family and my kids. And if it's working, I don't have to change it just because someone else is doing it that way.
I love that so much. And I love the example of the food for you, because you will see other parents on Instagram or wherever it is with these like intricate fancy dinners every night and very scheduled dinners and things like that. And it might get you into this trap where you're thinking like, I'm messing this all up. I'm doing it all wrong. But like maybe something that's really important to you isn't really important to them. And you're doing this other thing. I don't know if well is the right word, but like right for your family. And maybe they don't focus on that for their family. And you just don't know that because they're not talking about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, food is such a hot topic, I think, in the parenting world. But I mean, there are some people that love to cook. I don't love to cook. I cook because I like to eat.
Yeah. My problem
and the cooking is what you have to do to get to the eating.
Yes. My problem
But if you're into that, then go for it, man.
Yeah, live it up. My issue with the cooking is I am not good at just like cooking. I'll either do something, box macaroni, or I think I have to get out this like recipe book. Like I get my Oshi Glow's recipe cookbook out and like make this like 14-step meal. It's like one extreme. There's no middle ground. It's like, can't you just make like baked spaghetti or like, something? But no, it's like as easy as possible. Frozen chicken nuggets, macaroni, or this like fancy vegan meal that actually none of my kids will eat. So they just end up eating peanut butter sandwiches. And my husband and I enjoy the fancy vegan meal. Okay. I love it. I love it. I love it. Let's talk about how we were parented and how that affects the way we parent today. We touched on it a little bit, but I think it would be important to cover how our emotions are associated with that and what we bring into, our lives now because of how we are parented.
Yes. I think this is one of the most important things for parents to know before they become parents, and then honestly, anytime. How we were parented is how we're going to parent from our gut. If you think about, I'm not going to go too deep into this because I'm terrible explaining it because I'm not a neuroscientist, but basically, when something happens over and over to you, it hardwires a connection in your brain. It's why if you're playing an instrument, you practice over and over and over and over and over until you can just do it. And our experience as children of how we were parented in our relationships with our parents or whoever our primary caregivers were, that happens over and over and over and over and over. How we were disciplined, how we were shown love, how we learned to behave, how we learned to make our parents proud. All of those things that happen over and over and over and over and over are hardwired in our brains and our bodies. So even if you don't have children, you have kind of a gut parenting style. If you think about, if you're walking through Target and you see some kid having a meltdown on aisle 4, you have a reaction to that. You have thoughts in your head.
Yep.
You have an opinion about it. Or if you're on an airplane and there's a baby crying behind you, like you have a reaction to that, even if you don't have children. And that's really, really important to be aware of, because for some of us, that our parents may have been great. Maybe they were really good at validating our emotions, and maybe they were very good at making us feel like they were proud of us no matter what. And maybe they were very connected with us and valued our relationship, but maybe they weren't. Maybe we had a parent that worked all the time and was never there. Or maybe we were communicated that education was really important, and our parents harped on our grades, and through that we learned that achieving was the way to get love and make our parents proud of us. Or maybe we grew up in a family that didn't talk about feelings, and so when you had feelings, you were just alone, or you were told to go to your room and come back out when you could be a happy person and around everybody again. And those are experiences that we're going to bring to our parenting, because we do what we know. And often what's tricky about this is often we don't even know that it's there until we have kids.
Yes.
And they do something and we open our mouth and our mom or dad comes out and we're like, whoa, where did that come from? And so reflecting on how we were parented and then bringing that into how it affects our parenting, because it absolutely does, is important, because if how we were parented is how we want to parent, great. But for a lot of us, how we were parented is not how we want to parent. I'll use myself as an example. So I grew up in a household where negative emotions were just like not a thing that we talked about or really expressed. It wasn't a full-on like waspy, like we just don't talk about anything, but it's very much a, little bit of a rub some dirt on it, like suck it up, you're fine, or you can go to your room and come out when you pulled yourself together. So I struggle with negative emotions as an adult, and I have had to actually learn how to be comfortable with them, because I don't want my kids to have the same struggles that I do now. And that took a lot of practice, because my instinct, because that's the way I grew up, is like, shut it down. Like, I'm so uncomfortable. Or even to dismiss the emotion of when my child has a meltdown or is upset of, you're okay. It's okay. You're fine. Like, you don't need, or even sometimes stop crying when I know like that's just how my child is communicating. So I've had to observe those things and learn to catch myself in them, and then choose how I want to respond differently. I want to be able to say, you're so upset. You really wanted to do that and mom told you no. Or even just to sit with it for me, as a person who grew up in a household where messy negative emotions basically weren't safe, it makes me really uncomfortable to just sit there and be with my child as they're having those messy emotions. And it gets better over time as we practice things, our brain learns new ways of doing it. But I have had to unlearn those things because I want to parent differently. And for so many parents, I think that first step of knowing how you were parented and then recognizing your reactions, we don't even do that. So we're blowing up at our kids, or we're being triggered by things, or we're doing the same things that our parents did to us that maybe weren't helpful for us or we didn't like, and we don't even know it.
You know, I'm always curious about this because I've been like researching positive parenting and things like that for years. And there's this school of thought of people who are like, they think that when we parent like that we're just being super soft and like, you know what I mean? And they'll say, oh, the kid needs to know who's in charge and all these things. And I have really struggled as I try to kind of live the positive parenting, recognize your emotions life of finding, I don't know if balance is the right word, but like a balance between that and making sure that my kids don't walk all over me, you know? And I've talked about this a million times on the podcast, and like, you know, I don't want people to judge me because they think that my kids own me and blah, blah, blah. But sometimes I do feel like I need to be a little more firm. And one of the reoccurring guests I've had on the show, Wendy Snyder, she talks about being firm and kind. I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Like when people question, like, we give kids too much control these days and we're kind of like dancing on a flower bed with their emotions and, you know, that kind of thing. Like, what is your response to that?
So I'm going to ask you to unpack that a little bit. What makes you feel like you have to be more firm?
Well, I think that like when my kid is having a meltdown or things, you know, or I give in to something, or, you know, I really struggle with people judging that I am not like, you know, I can't believe she just let him talk to her that way. That's one of the big things. Or I can't believe he just did what she told him not to do and there's not a bigger consequence. Things like that. And I'm like, well, should there be a bigger consequence? I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I'm hearing you, I'm going to go all therapist. I'm hearing you say that how others may perceive your parenting or your maybe fear of being judged by others sometimes makes you feel like you need to be more heavy-handed or structured, or maybe even punish your kids more.
That, and my fear that they'll do it again. Like, don't go past that stop sign on your bike without me. 5-year-old rolls on through. That kind of stuff. Like, and then we have a talk about it. Like and I say, like, my job as your parent is to keep you safe. That is the reason. That is my number one job, is to make sure you are safe. That is the reason we had that rule, and you disobeyed that rule. And if there's not like a harsher consequence than me just like explaining that to them, that's what I worry about. You know what I mean?
Yes. That, I'm glad you gave me an example, because that's easier to, like, if you're talking about a specific situation. So I would say that connected parenting or respectful parenting, or whatever you want to call it, is more of a both and than an either or. So you're going to set the limit or the boundary and explain the reason behind it. And then if your 5-year-old goes through the stop sign again, you may set a stronger boundary of, we're going to have to be done riding our bike for the day because I need you to be safe, and you're not able to be safe right now. And then you're going to get a meltdown, obviously.
Yep.
And so it's setting the stronger boundary and setting the limit. That's also, you could call that a consequence. The consequence
I think so.
We can't ride our bike anymore because we're not able to be safe. and then validating the emotion. I know it's so hard when you can't ride your bike. You really wanted to keep riding, and mom had to say no. That's really frustrating. It's more of a both and than an either or.
No, I like that. And I think that that's part laziness on my part, and probably other people listening too, because you want him to keep riding his bike because it's easier for you when he can ride his bike.
Yes.
Because he's having fun and he's entertained.
I think that's one of the things that is very difficult about connected parenting is it takes effort and creativity.
Yes.
And when we're tired, we just don't want to deal with it.
Right.
We just want to be like, just do the thing. Whatever I can make you say to do the thing.
Yeah.
Just do what I say. Oh my God.
Totally. I love that. Yeah, and I think I've gotten better with the fear of the judgment of other people. And I think as I've been doing this long enough, I say this over and over and over again, but maybe there are new people here. It's like those people that might see how you react to a situation on the playground have no idea what you are talking about with your kids when you get home. Because a lot of those like conversations that have to happen after the fact, when the heat of the moment is not happening, when it's not in the heat of the moment, that's where I see like a lot of reconsideration, especially with my bigger kids. Like, okay, I understand. But if I'm like trying to get it at them right as it's happening, they're just like, I don't want to talk to you. I'm not listening, So nobody knows what your bedtime conversations are and things like that.
Yeah, they don't know your life.
Exactly. You don't know me.
I also think about in those moments where my child is not complying, I try to reframe that. And this is just something I've used that's helped me personally, of we are practicing this right now.
Yeah.
Like humans do not get things right the first time. It takes practice. So we're practicing being safe when we ride our bikes. We're practicing putting our dishes away after dinner. We're practicing picking up our toys at the end of the day. And that means that you're not going to do it right every time. But it also means that you keep practicing. You keep doing it. And that is something that I say to myself, and honestly have even said to other people who have observed my children, that has helped me have a little more grace for that of, okay, they didn't do it this time, but we're practicing this. Like, we don't have it down yet.
Okay, I'm curious what your response is as a parent. And I know that your oldest is still pretty young, but like, what is your plan also going forward if your kid just straight up refuses to clean up his toys?
Oh, we tried several different things. We definitely went through that. And I think you just have to pivot and figure out what works in the moment. We have done, let's see, I've put on music.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And we've cleaned to music. We have realized that picking up right before bedtime did not work. Because we were all tired and ornery. So we started picking up right after dinner. We changed the time. And we try to make it, my kiddo has really gotten into the Cosmic Kids yoga videos. She likes to do one before bed. So we've made it like pick up and then you can do your yoga. So fun. Kind of an incentive of like, you do this thing that I know you don't really want to do.
Yeah.
And then we even went so far, this is a little more of what would have happened to me as a kid, but honestly it worked for a while, so we did it. Well, you can choose not to pick up your toys, but any of the things that are still out, we're gonna put them away for a day and you don't get to play with them again. And so like she still gets to pick, and then the next day when she can't find that thing, we're like, well, remember you decided that you didn't want to pick that up, so now we don't have it to play with, and then it comes out the next day. So, but again, it's about creativity. It's what works for your kids. I know kiddos that I would use that move and they would be like, cool, don't care. And eventually all their toys would be gone.
Try me again, lady. You can keep on going.
Oh,
yeah.
And honestly, some nights is like, I don't have the energy to wrestle with you on this, so we're just not going to do it. And I'm going to pick them up.
Yep.
Because I just don't feel like it.
And that's okay.
We're practicing.
Yeah, I mean, and I pick up stuff more often than not just because I don't want to deal with it. And sometimes I'm like, man, I know I should make them do it, but like I can do it quicker, faster, and better. you know.
Yes.
Okay, tell us about your book that's coming out, Parent Goals: The Millennials Guide to New Parent Preparedness.
Yes. When I started thinking about becoming a parent, I am a researcher, I'm a preparer, I'm very type A. I want to know all the things before I do a thing. I looked for a book that was, questions to discuss and, things to consider and plans to make and how to prepare. And it didn't exist. We did something similar when my husband and I got engaged of like marriage prep. There's like a million books of marriage prep. And I basically wanted that for parenting. But I did a deep dive on the internet and nothing came up with it. And I was lamenting this to my best friend, and she was like, you could probably just write that if you wanted to. And it started with just a list of questions that I wanted to talk about with my husband. And that became an outline, and then that became a book. So it really is the book that I wish I had in exploring what I needed to discuss with my partner and what things I needed to know and kind of what I was getting into before becoming a parent. And it's a little bit of practical stuff like, preparing for the transition, creating a support system, but it's a lot of the like underneath the practical stuff. What happens to your relationship when you have a kid? How are you setting boundaries with your family members in that transition time if you need to? What are your fears around parenting? What are you scared of? Because we all have them. And how are you going to manage those fears? What is, how were you parented and how is that going to come into play in your parenting? What sort of discipline do you want to use? Exploring that. What is out there? What do you think might work for your family? The family mission statement and values is in there. And then one of the things that I really love how it turned out is I decided to interview other parents. I realized that my experience is just one experience, and we all do things differently and come from different backgrounds. And I interviewed about 50 parents, moms and dads. I really wanted to interview dads as well about all of those topics and ask them questions. And I was able to integrate their answers into the different topics, into the different chapters in the book. So it is a combination of a bunch of research and my experience, and then what I do with parents in the adoption world, because so much of that is preparing them for what they're about to get into. And then also the experiences and advice from other parents who have been there, who I stuck to parents who had pretty young kids so that they remembered the time before a little better.
Yeah.
And they were all real parents who were just in the thick of it every day, of what worked for them, what their fears were, what their hopes were, the joys that they found in their children, with the hopes that even if you may not connect directly to my story, that you might connect with someone else's experience.
How did you find those parents?
A lot of just asking.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them were people I know in my social circle. And then every time I talked with someone, I asked them if they had anyone else that I might be able to talk to. So I had a lot of conversations with high school friends and college friends and friends of friends, and posted in a couple of different parenting groups I'm in on Facebook, and had some lovely people just say that they were interested in speaking to me. But yeah, just a lot of like cold asking, like, hey, I'm writing this book. Would you talk to me about your parenting experience?
I think some of the best projects and books come from like filling the need that you didn't have met, right? Like, it's like you're looking for it, you can't find it. Okay, well, like I can create it myself, and that feels really overwhelming probably at first, but somebody's got to do it.
Yes. And that was highly motivating for me. Of people, it's like when you have your first kid, people are like, what, are you going to have another kid? And you're like, I just have this one. Thank you. Doing this right now. I feel like the same things happen with my book. Like people hear you're publishing a book and they're like, oh, well, what's your next book going to be? And I'm like, oh, I'm doing this one.
This is not even out yet.
And that was so motivating for me in writing. Is it actually helped me explore those things on a deeper level. But I just kept thinking about all of the parents who are probably similarly in my shoes of just wanting something to give them a guidepost, to tell them what's important and what's not, to give some idea of what they're about to get into. Because the reality is you don't know until you know, but to at least attempt to prepare for this huge, huge thing that we don't really get any preparation for. I mean, we get more preparation and there are more hoops to jump through for getting a driver's license to drive a car than for taking a baby home from the hospital.
It's crazy.
So anything I think that can make people feel like they just have some tiny bit of preparation, I thought would be helpful to new parents and prospective parents.
For sure. I mean, part of the reason I started this podcast is because as my kids got older, I had more questions. I felt like until they were that, like, I don't know, 3 probably, when they really had the attitude and like, this is like, we're dealing with some real big emotions here. That's when I started being like, oh my gosh. And same thing, like I couldn't find what I was looking for. I mean, writing a book, that's a lot more work than like hosting a weekly podcast. I mean, as far as like getting that project done, but I do feel that there's a lot of power in creating something that you're looking for when you can't find it.
Absolutely.
Okay, one last thing, and we're going to close up here. How do you define connected discipline? Oh, we have the same water bottle, pretty much. Look at us.
So much fun. I would define it as prioritizing your relationship with your child over their compliance.
Okay. I like that. And
putting your relationship with your child first and foremost.
Which is what you would want to do with your spouse.
Yep.
Okay, and then can we define parenting identity?
Parenting identity. Tell me more. What?
I have this on my notes. Like for some reason, I thought that was on your form. Emma, you can edit this, me rambling out right here. Well, I guess your parenting identity, would that go along with like your mission statement? Like you having your, you know what? Let's just scrap that. Let's just scrap it.
Okay.
I have it as a starred like on my notes, and I don't know why I wrote that down, but maybe I thought that was on your sheet.
Well, I do talk about like the identity shift when you become a parent, but that's like a whole nother
thing. We don't have time to get into that. Okay. No, maybe we can do another episode on that. Okay, Emma, edit that. Sorry, Lindsay. Okay, well, I feel like I have learned a lot and already grown as a parent just from this like 40 minutes that we've had together. So thank you for that.
Thank you. What a lovely compliment.
And people can get your book in November, right? It comes out November 2021.
Yes, November 16th.
Okay, that's so exciting.
Yes, I'm very excited.
Hit me up when that happens, and maybe we can do like an Instagram live or something to like 10 minutes to like get people excited about it.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
All right, Lindsay, what is something? Every time I ask this question, like the guest I'm talking to just did something really big. She wrote a book, but what is something professionally or personally you'd like to do that you haven't done yet?
Yes. So my background, my very early background and what made me passionate about working with children is in camp. I actually met my husband at summer camp.
Oh,
we
cool.
were both summer camp counselors. And so that is something I've always been passionate about. And I have a dream of one day starting a camp nonprofit for specialty camps. So each week would be focused on a different population, like kids with autism or kids who are gender creative or transgendered or LGBTQ or adoption. basically gathering kiddos that have something in common that often makes them feel different, and then giving them the experience of being surrounded by kids who are the same as them in that way.
Wow.
And that is, I started looking into it a couple years ago, but then pandemic hit, and I was like, this is not the time.
Start planning now, and in 2 years, hopefully that'll be a safe time to launch it. 1 year, I don't know. Wow, I love that. That's a big dream.
Yeah,
that's big stuff. What is the best, most recent book you've read?
Okay, I couldn't pick just one because I read so many. I picked a nonfiction and a fiction.
Love it.
So for nonfiction, I just finished the new book, What Happened to You, by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey.
Is it good?
Excellent. Oh, yeah, I've been recommending it to all of my parents. I think we're actually probably going to require our parents to read it soon. It is the best trauma primer for like lay people that I've ever read. And even as someone, I eat, sleep, and breathe trauma in my job, I learn new things reading it. So it's very readable. I've also heard the audiobook is excellent because it's styled as a conversation between Dr. Perry and Oprah. So good stuff.
Oh, I'm excited.
Also, for those who are intrigued by the reflecting on your own parenting and how that affects, you parenting your kids, also a good read for that.
Okay. Love it.
And then for my fiction book, I just reread The Proposal by Jasmine Guillory. I love anything by her. I've been on a real romance kick since the pandemic.
Okay, I'm writing
that
down.
Just like, give me some witty dialogue and a happy ending.
Yes, I love Emily Giffin books for that. Just totally mindless, lose yourself in it. Also watching Virgin River, which also gives me that fix. And I heard there was a book series on that show. So, do you have any shows?
And I have to check that out.
Yeah, do you have any shows that you're binging or that you find enjoyable to escape to?
Yes, I just watched the last Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which made me so sad.
Isn't that sad when you finish a series?
I'm also, anyone that has kids will find this enjoyable. I'm watching a sitcom called Life in Pieces.
Okay.
It is each episode is 4 short stories, and it's about like a bigger family. So there's like mom and dad, and they have 3 adult children, and each child has a family. And it is very funny. It reminds me a little bit of like Modern Family, except it's scripted, but it's like comedy just about like the everyday silliness of families.
What is that on?
Hulu.
Okay. I'm going to check that out.
It's very funny.
Wow. Okay. I'm really excited about the book and the show. Do you have a trip that you have taken with your family or that you want to take with your family that you would recommend? You're at a hard time because 1 and 3
with kids or without kids.
Right. Well, you could do both. I mean, we didn't start really doing trips until like 2 years ago. And that's because our older kids were older. We still had kind of little ones, but when we just had little kids, I was like, meh.
We our go-to every year. My mom and stepmom go to Destin, Florida, so that's been kind of our kid trip.
Yeah,
we actually just got back this weekend, and I mean the kids have fun, but it's just exhausting.
It's so much work.
Mm-hmm.
What's a non-kid trip?
Non-kid. Probably my favorite trip we ever went on. My husband and I both loved Germany. He did study abroad there, and my family has German roots, and I've always been into that. Before we had kids, this is actually in my book of like make a list of the things you want to do.
Yeah.
Right before we started trying, we did a tour of Germany where we started north and worked our way down south during Christmas time, and we visited 5 or 6 cities and hit up all the Christmas markets in each of those cities. And that was awesome. I loved it so much.
That sounds very lovely.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful, snowy and cold and twinkle lights.
Yeah. Do you have a kid's book that you recommend?
Yes, I also picked 2 for this. I cannot just pick one book.
Books are the best.
The Rabbit Listened is one of my favorites. I can't remember the author, but it's just it's a beautiful story about exploring your feelings and how sometimes someone just being there with you can be the best thing when you're struggling. And the illustrations are beautiful. I just really like it. We also just got a book called We Listen to Our Bodies. As having a 3-year-old, we've been talking a lot about body boundaries and body autonomy, especially with younger sibling of like, you cannot just grab their body. That is their body. And that has been a really good book to help us with that. But it's also has a lot of validating emotions. And I love, there's a variety of kids of different colors in it. Okay. The main character looks like she is Black, but there's a variety, some diversity. And I also love, it's like preschool aged. There is a scene where they ask all the kids to choose a favorite thing in the classroom and then come to circle time. And one of the little boys chooses some like sparkly purple shoes. So we're very like, I do not like gender boxes, try to keep that open-ended for our kids. So I love that just like tiny example just worked into the story of like, this is a normal thing that boys can do.
Yeah.
Because they can also like sparkly purple things. Yes. And that is fun. So really good book and part of a new series that I think is coming out. I'll be buying the future ones for sure.
Well, that makes sense. Why in your email you mentioned the Dr. Christina Brown interview.
Yes. Yes. I love that interview and her book was so fantastic. I had like a tiny panic attack when I found out I was having a boy because I was like, I don't know, how do I do this? Like I'm a girl. I know how girls do the things.
Yeah.
And I knew that I didn't want to raise my children with gender boxes, but I didn't really know how to go about that. And her book is the only book I've ever found that just lays out like, here is how you do this. And also here's all the research behind it so that when people question you, you can argue with them.
Yes.
Yes. It was great.
Yeah, her book is good and very informative. Okay. What's our last message that we want to leave with the audience today?
Yes. I want to leave with the audience that the parenting world is going to try to get you to focus only on your kids. You know, that's the message that it gives us. Focus on your kids, sacrifice, your kids come first, always the kids. But the real secret of parenting is that in order to be a good parent, you always have to start with yourself. You have to start with your history, your needs, because we all know if we're not taking care of our needs, we're not at the top of our game as parents. What you're bringing to the table when you're interacting with your children, because all of it affects you and then therefore is going to affect your children and how you interact with them.
That's good. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here today.